Hi, we're going to be looking at an introduction to 3D Studio. Now 3D Studio looks like this, and in this lesson what we're going to be looking at is several introductory things. So first of all, we'll be looking at creating objects and how to deal with the controls in 3D Studio. Then we'll look at the basic tools, like how do we move, scale, and rotate. We'll also look at the different views, as well as the user interface, so just the different things in this interface, as well as finally how to duplicate objects. So first of all, you may want to know that over to the right hand side, this little plus sign here, there's a lot of tabs we'll be looking at later. This little plus sign here generally has standard primitive objects. So for example, if I click on box and I go onto any of these views, which we'll be talking about in a bit, and I start to create my box, so I can drag, and then when I let go, you'll naturally be able to click up. You'll find pretty quickly that you can create objects pretty easily. So whether it's a sphere, a cylinder, whatever it happens to be in any of these views, you can create those objects. So that's one of the things just to kind of quickly be aware of. So that's kind of where you create your objects on. Now with an object, and you may want to practice this along with me if you've got 3D Studio open, one thing that you want to generally have turned on is what's called the edged faces. So if you go to the view here that's called perspective and you click on the word default shading, you want to activate what's called edged faces. Okay, what it does is basically makes those faces, it shows you all the segments that an object is made out of. Now the controls, first of all, to zoom, and you can do this in any screen, okay, to zoom you can just scroll your middle mouse. You can do that in the top view, and we talk about these views in just a second, the left view, etc. So that is zooming. I'd suggest just practicing only in this perspective view at first. So zooming is scrolling your middle mouse. Panning is clicking your middle mouse. Okay, so you can actually pan, which is grabbing your screen. So click your middle mouse, and again, you can do that in any screen. And finally, rotating your object, which I would only do in this perspective screen, is holding down Alt on your keyboard as well as clicking your middle mouse, and that allows you to rotate. Okay, so a few things about the interface I'd like to talk about are the views. So you'll notice here in my view it says top, front, left, and perspective. Now in general you always want to have a top, front, and side view, whether it's left or right. So if you happen to accidentally rotate one of the views that's top, front, or side, you'll notice that all it says is orthographic for its view, which is actually useless because it's very similar perspective just with no color. So if that happens, what you can do is click in the window that you'd like to change, and remember you want a top, front, and side view. So if you click in a window and press the letter T, it will go back to the top view. If you click in a window and you press the letter F, it will become the front view. If you click in a window and you press the letter L or R, it will become the left or right view. So if you accidentally rotate one of the top, front, or side views, left or right, you want to get them back to the standard top, front, or side view. And finally, you can adjust the size of these windows. So if you click in the middle of all four views, you can adjust them. Okay, and they're advantageous at different times, and we'll talk about that probably in a future lesson. Okay, all right. So next is the basic tools. So you have the controls. The basic tools that you're going to use in this program are the following. These three. Okay, so the first one is called select and move. The second one is called select and rotate, and the third one is called select and uniform scale. Just before we move forward, you may also want to activate this button here called angle snap toggle. The reason for that is when you rotate, it will rotate by increments of 5 degrees, which is really helpful when you're building future structures, okay? So I'm going to activate it so it's blue. It's angle snap toggle. All right, let's show you the variety of tools. So first of all, select and move. If you click on it and you have an object selected, you can click on one of the axes like the letter Z, which is going up and down. You'll notice that as I do that, it's moving in the front view and the left view, but not in the top, which makes sense because if I'm moving up and down, the top view would remain the same. Or I can grab the y-axis and move it left or right. You'll see that changes in two of the other views, and the same thing with moving it forward and backwards. Okay, so that's the select and move tool, allows you to move the 3D object. If you go into the middle of the handle, it does allow you to move it kind of randomly around. Okay, the next tool I'd like to show you is actually the select and uniform scale tool. Which is the third one here. So there's three, the third one. Now, a few things about it which are interesting. First of all, if you hover over one of the axes letters, and you can do this in any view. You can do it in the top view. You can do it in whatever view you like to. But if you hover over one of the letters, it will only scale it in that direction. So if I hovered over X and I pulled my mouse, it's only scaling it in that X-axis direction, which can be helpful. Okay. If you just pulled it in the Y direction, you'll notice that it just gets stretched out on the Y-axis. And the same thing, regardless of which view you're in here, same thing for the Z-axis. Okay. Now, secondly, if you go into the middle of that tool, of the scale tool, and you click your mouse and drag it down or up, it will scale the entire object proportionally in all three axes. Okay. Finally, in some cases, you want to scale this in two axes. In that case, if you hover between the two axes, so like you see here, where just the Y and the Z are activated, and you do that, it's only scaling in the Y and Z axes and not at all in the X axis. Okay, so that's the scale tool. Finally, the rotate tool basically divides the tool into three kind of hemispheres or three circles here. When you click on one of them and you drag your mouse to the left or right or up and down, you'll notice that it rotates on that axis. Okay, and you'll notice because my angle snap toggle is activated that those numbers are going up by increments of 5, which is actually pretty helpful. All right, so those are the basic tools. Now, we've talked about the views. Now, the basic interface is as you create objects. So if I was to create a sphere, for example, off to this left-hand side is the object panel. So if you're really interested in knowing your objects, you could rename them. It might be interesting to you to also know that there's a little snowflake here where you could actually freeze them. Freezing them makes sure that you can't edit them by accident or move them. There's also a little eyeball here where you can hide them. So that's important. Finally, we're going to get into duplicating objects. So if you want to duplicate an object, and this is really, really helpful for when you're like, oh, I need 2 of those or 3 of those, or I need that, but then I can scale it, and I'll show you an example in a bit. That is if you go to your Select and Move tool, you hold down your Shift key on your keyboard, and hover over one of the axes. So if I want to duplicate this sphere upwards, if I hold down Shift, hover over the Z axis, and then click on the Z and drag my mouse up, I'm getting a duplicate. Okay, and there's a duplicate of it. And I could theoretically, if I wanted to, I could scale it down. And that would be a good way, if I wanted to work on making a snowman. Okay, you can see from the side views, these are really, really helpful views. So in the future, you're going to find that having all these different views at different times is going to be really helpful in your design. Okay, so that is it for an introduction to 3D Studio. I will also mention really quickly that there's different tabs that are off to the side here as well. And one that you're commonly going to use is the Modify tab to modify some of your objects.